So today we're talking censorship because about a week ago I did a video on the C word that shall not be named. And by C word, I mean coronavirus. And immediately when I uploaded it, specifically this video is in reference to boosting your immune system. So not a super edgy topic, but apparently that was edgy enough for YouTube to essentially demonetize me for that video. I've made like 30 cents off of it at this point, even though it's been doing pretty well for my channel, as opposed to like, the $2 I probably could have made off of it as a small YouTuber. Now I'm making hardly anything, and it's because they're saying it's not suitable for ads. Now, there's news that's come out recently about why coronavirus videos are apparently so controversial that YouTube has basically decided to censor them. And since censorship hits close to home for me as someone who worked in mainstream media for 12 years, I want to talk censorship today with you. So let's get started.
We are in Clearwater tonight. I'm Allison Morrow.
Hi, I'm Allison Morrow.
I'm Allison Morrow.
And I've gone to a lot of places.
On St. Pete Beach, Allison Morrow.
And now with my former Force Recon Marine husband, I'm going off-grid-ish.
So essentially, when I upload my video about a week ago, I notice this. And if you can see, there's a yellow dollar sign as opposed to the green dollar signs underneath my other videos, which are basically monetization on. And if you read this box here, it says limited. This video is running limited or no ads due to content identified as not suitable for most advertisers. It remains fully playable and is eligible to earn subscription revenue from YouTube Premium. So I looked up what is suitable content for advertisers, and for the most part, YouTube's ad policy is like adult content, violent stuff, bullying, things that are just like they've determined to be mean and aggressive behavior. And so I'm like, why is my how to boost your immune system to fight the coronavirus so edgy for them? And it turns out that I wasn't the only one who was concerned about censorship over coronavirus videos, because if you look over here, this article from Tube Filter says, this came out recently, YouTube will allow now a limited number of channels to monetize coronavirus, says CEO Susan Wojcicki. And that's because so many people complained, like me, I'm a nobody, but bigger YouTubers, like there's a tweet here from Phil DeFranco, who's got several million followers on YouTube, and here he has like a video, YouTube on their way to demonetize your coronavirus, and Susan writes back, "We hear you, update to come on this tomorrow, stay tuned." And then of course we find out now they're going to allow some of these videos to be monetized. So who exactly are they going to allow to make money off of a YouTube video, which, keep in mind, this is what keeps YouTubers going. So it's not like somebody's trying to evilly make a profit off of coronavirus. It's like this is the incentive for journalists to work, whether you're an independent journalist or you're somebody who works in the mainstream market. Like, you get paid for your work. And so I'm not, advocating here that there should be some kind of like massive profitability off of frenzy and pandemic and disease. I'm just saying, if you're going to incentivize people to look for information and make it available to the public, then this issue over demonetization is really an issue that needs to continue to be discussed, and obviously has been discussed for quite a while now on platforms like YouTube, because YouTube is starting to get a little bit, if not a lot, big brother with who they decide is controversial or an authority or acceptable or a bully or not. And if you're not aware of that conversation, there's plenty of material on YouTube with people debating free speech and YouTube as a platform versus a publisher, and whether these social media platforms should be regulated, because they are really involved in the censorship game and have become the main town square for people who want to get information out there. This is the way we talk with each other. So should we have like one or two companies basically making the decision about what free speech is now in the United States? So if we look specifically at this article, it says that Wojcicki wrote that YouTube's sensitive events policy, under which it demonetizes content about events like natural disasters, shootings, and pandemics that result in a loss of life, was designed to apply to short-term events. Now that we have coronavirus here to stay, you've probably gone to your grocery store and found that toilet paper is not here to stay. I actually find it quite fascinating that Seattleites have this reputation for being tree huggers, except when they're worried about having diarrhea at home and not able to leave their houses, because they will ransack toilet paper aisles for that specific purpose and not worry about overuse of paper. But anyway, she goes on to basically say they got lots of complaints from a number of creators, and now those people saying that even a passing mention of coronavirus, which I'm sure this video will probably get demonetized again because I said it multiple times, this is keeping people from having their videos not just make money, but also be recommended by YouTube, because that's another thing we're going to talk about in a second. Is it's not just the demonetization issue, it's a censorship issue by shadow banning and keeping people who might have alternative viewpoints from having access to the same audiences that YouTube deems to be an authority. So, like, what does that mean exactly? And that's something we'll talk about in a second, because authorities over the decades have not always been right, especially mainstream authorities that, you know, certain bureaucracies have said we should all listen to have certainly gotten things wrong. So I'm an advocate of being able to allow lots of people to get out there and get information out there, and hopefully allowing the consumers to be the judge. Now, what they're saying basically is that YouTube will soon allow some news outlets and creators like myself who accurately self-certify to monetize content about coronavirus. So what does it mean to self-certify? Well, if we look at this article, it essentially means that you have to be the person nowadays that clicks whether your content is ad-friendly content. And essentially that's supposed to be like no bad language or just not a lot of it. Ad appropriate because it doesn't contain adult content, violence, harmful or dangerous acts, drug-related content, hateful content, firearms-related content, which has become also a real sticking point for people. Like, if you talk about guns at all, it gets demonetized, even though that's a pretty important debate right now in our society. And so, obviously, this isn't a new conversation, but I just found it to be interesting that coronavirus was considered part of that. I even had a notification in my video to go to the WHO. That was basically what they were telling people, like, hey, if you really want information about this, go to the WHO. I have nothing against the WHO, but it's basically saying, like, we don't know what this girl is saying, so you probably should just go over here. Now, I don't think that having the opportunity to have content from the CDC or the WHO or your local county public health official is a bad thing at all. I think all of that information should be available to people. I'm a former journalist. I worked in mainstream television news for 12 years. And before that, I worked in cable news in New York City at Fox News Channel. I've seen how newsrooms operate from a content choosing perspective for many, many, many years. I've seen how censorship works in newsrooms. And now that the public is shifting from mainstream media to platforms like YouTube, I think the conversation is equally important regarding both of those options, whether you're watching national cable news, you're watching your local TV news station, or you're going on YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is that you use for your news. There are a few, I should say, greater and more important conversations right now than the one over free speech as it relates to social media. And when you have an opportunity to see it work in real time, and this is the first time I've ever had any monetization issues on my channel, I just thought this was a little weird because, again, the guy I interviewed was a doctor. Now, he's a naturopathic physician. They go to the same amount of school as a medical doctor, but still the establishment sometimes sees naturopathic doctors as sort of anti-mainstream, anti-establishment kind of medical practitioner, which I think is unfortunate because, again, we go back to the censorship issue. Whoever's not seen as an authority or who's seen as an outlier is seen as suspect. And I'll give you an example of that. This is an article from Business Insider. Wellness influencers are telling followers potentially toxic doses of vitamins will protect them from the coronavirus. Now, first off, it's interesting that they're calling them wellness influencers because actually, like, the people they cite in these articles are doctors. And so it turns out like if you're going to have somebody who's a doctor come on your channel and talk about this stuff, which I did, the Business Insider Authority writing the article here is calling them a wellness influencer. So, and then they call the MDs an expert, which I don't know. I take a little bit of issue with that. But what I want to show you is like scrolling all the way down. Not that, I mean, honestly, like I haven't gone to check the people that they're citing in this, whether they're right or wrong or indifferent. But I think what really goes to show how this all works is when you scroll down to the very bottom of the article, they quote an MD who basically says, the danger of using non-mainstream therapies is that many of these side effects that are not well understood or publicized, as well as potentially dangerous interactions with medications that patients are already taking. So this is a doctor from Westmed Medical Group in Purchase, New York. And then she says, in trying to solve this problem with non-traditional approaches, patients run the risk of putting themselves at greater risk than the infection itself. So basically two things here, the dangers of using non-mainstream therapies, and then she calls them non-traditional approaches. Now, I'm not saying like if you're somebody who thinks that lying down in your driveway and having your husband run over you with the car is a great non-traditional therapy, like you may want to check the fruits of your labor there. And if it works or doesn't work, I'm going to say that's probably not a good idea. But the things we talked about with Dr. Romali, I'm going to show you a quick video and you tell me if this is controversial, is like decreasing your inflammation, going out and getting enough sunlight every day, exercise, vitamin A, for instance, like caring about what you eat. I mean, these are not crazy ideas, but somehow this is, again, something that would be considered like non-traditional, because when you watch the traditional authorities, you're just hearing like, get your flu shot, wash your hands, cover your mouth. So here's a quick snippet from my coronavirus video. Again, you tell me what's so controversial about this. What do we do at this point?
Do you do?
Yeah, what do we do? Help us.
People think that they actually die of a virus, right? Even if you're looking at Ebola, if someone, let's say, gets a strep infection of their throat, people don't actually die of the virus. It sounds crazy, but you don't actually die of the infection. You die from the inflammatory process. And the reason why that's important is because if we think that's what we're actually dying of, then let's look at how we bring down inflammation in our body, right? Time magazine, everybody says, what's the number one killer in the United States is inflammation. That's literally what sepsis is of the blood. It's an inflammatory process that can't be stopped. And so every virus, every flu is that inflammatory process. So let's look at our body and say, okay, what if we get the flu? How do we bring down that inflammatory process? And so it doesn't really matter the exact organism. It's just how do we keep our bodies strong and healthy?
Now, on a personal note, my parents are both medical doctors. One of them is an orthopedic surgeon. The other one is a radiologist. And when we were growing up, they were very skeptical of doctors like Dr. Romali. They didn't really know a whole lot or think very highly of the I don't know, they just the non-Western model, I guess. And subsequently, since then, my dad especially, as I became a journalist who was covering food and agriculture, for instance, became really interested in the topic of natural health and food, for instance, as really important to our immune function and how that affects arthritis, for instance, and other issues that he was dealing with as an orthopedic surgeon. Now he thinks doctors like Dr. Romali are a really valuable part of the medical culture, but he would be the first one to admit that when he was in medical school, he was taught more what would be called battlefield medicine. You come in with a broken bone or you need a knee replacement, you have to have some kind of surgery, really good at that. But when it comes to chronic problems, fatigue syndromes or autoimmune disorders, that kind of stuff, doctors in the mainstream medical world are not really even given more than a couple weeks of dietary education. So they're not learning the difference between, one kind of, red meat versus another kind, like grass-fed versus corn-fed, or, phytochemicals that are in certain kinds of meats versus the other kinds of meats, and fish, and, the stuff that, somebody like Dr. Romali, if I get into a car accident and I bash my head into the front windshield, I'm probably not going to go to Dr. Romali and ask him what supplement I should take. I'll probably go to an emergency room surgeon, and I'm certain glad that we have those people, but I'm not going to go to an emergency room surgeon to find out, how to, figure out why my skin's itchy. pee, or I'm having like leaky gut syndrome or something like that, I'm going to go to somebody like Dr. O'Malley because that's his background. And I think those people should be seen as experts too. So it concerns me kind of the language I'm seeing, because YouTube is saying essentially they're going to determine who is the authority and who's not an authority on this issue. And then based on YouTube deciding this, which, like, how much medical training has YouTube had? Like, I don't know what kind of medical training Susan Wojcicki's had, but I'm going to guess probably not that much. But they're going to determine for us who the experts and the authorities are. And, videos with people like Dr. O'Malley are going to be looked at suspectly in relation to videos from like the CDC or from your government health official. Not, again, a knock on the mainstream bureaucratic medical model or anything, just saying, like, I feel like YouTube deciding who is the legitimate authority and who is not is, like, not necessarily an organization that I put all of my trust in when it comes to medical knowledge. So I just leave that there. Now, as somebody who has been in television news for a long time, sometimes the very, like, insidious, low-level censorship that happens, and I would say this is probably the most common, is like confirmation bias and journalists who just kind of all sort of think the same way, and they don't really have alternative voices in the newsroom to challenge them, and they also are under serious deadline pressure, and their bosses want them to keep churning out the materials. They're just trying to find different angles to it, and that doesn't always give them the opportunity to sort of think outside of the box. And so I would say, like, a lot of the journalists that I've worked with have very good intentions, but they're in some cases set up to fail, in other cases set up to not do great work because of time limitations and just like their ability to have access to alternative voices, because in a lot of ways, like, the news cycle moves so fast and people tend to start thinking a lot the same way, and so confirmation bias takes over and they don't necessarily know what's in their blind spot. So just to give them the benefit of the doubt there. But then in other cases, there is more direct censorship that is, like, more, I would say, egregious is probably the right word here. I have had at least one boss in my career feel like he was morally responsible as, like, a crusader to determine what was true and false for you at home, and would not let alternative voices speak because he felt like it was his calling essentially to filter for you what should and should not be allowed. And I actually think that idea is not so uncommon in newsrooms. It may not be as vocalized as my former boss was about it, but I do think there's sort of this idea nowadays that, like, journalists are going to decide for you who is fake news and who is going to be allowed to talk. Now, I can see why people think that that should be something that should be considered a journalistic ethic, that, like, we shouldn't just give both sides equal opportunity if we know one side is off the rails. That said, this is a very, very tricky and dangerous tightrope to walk, because in some cases it may be very obvious who's, like, the wackadoodle that you don't want to give time and space to, and maybe everybody could agree with that, that judgment. But in other cases, it's really not so obvious, and oftentimes falls down to political perspective, religious perspective, background, cultural stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be so black and white. And so then now all of a sudden you have a newsroom or a news manager that's saying, like, no, that's crazy talk, when in reality it's just that person's read on the situation. And so, like, it's just a very, very, very slippery slope. And I've seen that happen in mainstream newsrooms. Obviously now we're seeing this on YouTube. And I guess really the point of this video is to say that you should know that this kind of censorship is happening and be a good consumer of news. Now I want to show you one last video. I did this for YouTube on my channel this is vintage Allison Morrow, like circa 2018. So way different hair. Before I stopped dyeing my hair to go more au naturel. And it's about the foot fluoroscope, which was this commonly used x-ray machine for really like 50 to 70 years back in the 20th century. I have met people who were kids that lined up outside Nordstrom to use this and to see their feet in the x-ray machine. That's literally how they fitted kids for shoes. And it was direct radiation to your feet. And the mainstream authorities thought this was totally fine. It took decades for these things to literally be taken off the market. So just take a look. This is archive video from the FDA.
Today's episode, radiating shoe sales.
The foot fluoroscope really dates back to 1920.
The marketing focus quickly shifted from veterans to young children and their mothers, who were anxious about their children's healthy growth.
It's basically an x-ray machine that shoe stores use to fit people for shoes. You put your feet in the shoes and then you stick your feet straight into this box of radiation. There's no protection, no lead blanket like we would use today. It's just you and the x-ray machine. It was often used for children because that way you didn't have to take the kid's word for it. Did the shoe fit? You could actually see their toes wiggling around inside the x-ray machine.
All right, so as you can see, like, that is just one example of many where it took science, conventional science, a long time to catch up with what actually was happening and what should or should not be truth and allowable on the market. And so to me, like, I will always err on the side of more information and less censorship. And I know there's more risk with that in the immediate, but it's not, to me, as risky in the long run as censorship, because to me, censorship is a power structure and power does not always breed truth. So I leave you with that thought. If you're interested in more on the coronavirus, you can check out my last video on it. It's not going to matter if you watch it or not, I guess, for monetization, because it's going to be demonetized probably regardless of what happens. But I hope you get some information out of it, because I think Dr. Romeli had a lot of great stuff to share. I think if you're interested in boosting your immune system, it's a good video to watch. And just as you're consuming news coverage about the coronavirus, I can't encourage you enough to be regularly looking for different kinds of content and to just be your own best advocate, your family's own best advocate. That's really at the end of the day, the bottom line of my channel is trying to do different videos on our journey off grid-ish, as we call it, into our Airstream that we're renovating, because we're just basically trying to take ownership and responsibility for our own lives. And as we learn more information, put it out on this YouTube channel. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video and you want more content like it. And I will see you next time. Again, I'm Allison Morrow. Bye.